It's like one of those calls when they clean. It's just really to be a week. Anyway. Chair. I don't know.
I hear.
We're planning to have to sweet up.
Say something.
Yeah.
Evil.
Try it.
She's doing. Yeah.
So we're
Legislative. Yes. Pretty good. You get it in my team.
Okay.
That's a few.
Yeah, it's just to cover. Everybody likes it. Yeah. Have a good evening. No, you're just black.
Check my email, just believe so. It's kind of tricky there.
It's ready when you.
We're ready.
It's ready when you.
And, we're getting all you guys ready. If you slide in when it gets here.
Thank you.
Yeah, he has a dive shop. Yeah, you can have a place where it's. Well. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
12 years.
Like that. Well, minutes after 4, we'll go ahead and get the work session going. And we'll give you a slide in when he's the gets here. And we'll call to order the work session of the Frisco Town Council for May 14th. With that, first agenda item is Tammy from CIRSA.
Executive director at CIRSA. And I've been in that capacity for about 5 or 6 years now. But before that, and before I was at CIRSA, I was actually a municipal attorney doing what that does. That does it much better than I do. And in one of my gigs way back when, I actually was responsible for drafting the charter for the Frisco. So if you have ever read all the way to the very last page, you will see that I actually proudly signed my name on that charter. And I do believe that it's still, one of the best charters in the state. It's compact and concise and does what it needs to say and doesn't say things that it doesn't need to say. So I'm proud of the charter and great work adopting it and maintaining it. If it's okay with you, I'm going to move up to the front of the room so that we're all kind of pointing in the same direction. And also, I do want to stand next to your town attorney so that I can look at him quizzically.
And I can't avoid his hair.
So congratulations to those of you who may be new to the town council. Who is new? Anybody? Hey. Okay. Well, congrats. Is it all you had expected it to be?
Yes, it's been just amazing. So
Congratulations.
thank you. Proud to be here.
And thank you for your service to the community. So I'm going to be covering 4 areas today, and I understand that Dad is also going to be covering a couple of them, and so I'm really going to invite Dad to chime in as much as possible, because I will talk about meetings and quasi-judicial issues. And then I want to talk a little bit about social media and council involvement in personnel matters. So in case that there is any inconsistency between the things that I say from a training standpoint and the legal advice you get from your town, why the town attorney is always right and I'm always wrong. So I just want to put that out there for the record. I actually want to just mention a little bit about STRSA, because there have been times when I've gone through a presentation like this, and then the only question I get is, and what is STRSA again? So we are your public entity self-insurance. We are literally your partners in risk management. And so, we certainly handle claims within the purview of your coverages, but we also like to do proactive things around risk management and loss control. And we believe that the town council is very much a critical part of overall risk management for the town. How you approach your role, the example that you set, and your commitment to ethical and lawful and practices really does filter throughout the entire town. And so, we look to you to be sort of our guiding star in terms of risk management issues. So again, these are the topics that I'll be covering. And so, are there any areas that are of particular interest to you all as the council? Is it quasi-judicial? Is it meetings, social media?
You've heard it a lot.
You've heard it, yeah, okay.
Somehow.
I would say the one that probably comes up, and they all come up, with quasi-judicial proceedings and what you can talk to people about in the community and what you can't is always a hairy thing that we need to remind ourselves of.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you very much for that, and I will emphasize it. So a little bit about the open meetings law and the importance of honoring transparency. If you look around the different levels of local government, state government, the feds, et cetera, I would say that municipal government is probably the most transparent, right? Because everybody knows where you live, they know how to find you, and they know how to talk to you. And so there's an expectation of transparency, and once that expectation is violated, then there are all kinds of problems from both a credibility and a legal standpoint. And some of these laws that we're going to talk about are somewhat non-intuitive, so they just they don't come naturally, I guess would be the way I would characterize it. So the first rule is Rule of 3. Anytime 3 or more of you or a quorum, whichever is less, gathers to discuss public business, then that is considered a meeting within the meaning of the open meetings law. And where things get a little bit weird and non-intuitive is when you inadvertently back into a public meeting by just having 3 or more of you present, and then the topic of conversation turns to a matter of public business. It's easy enough to have it happen, right? But depending on where it happens, when it happens, how frequently, who's watching, right? That's where you can end up with problems, because people will start losing faith in terms of how closely you're hewing to the requirements of the open meetings law. Because even if you walk backwards into a meeting, right, it's like, well, okay, where's the public notice of that meeting, right? Where is the opportunity of the public to observe and potentially participate? Right, so those kinds of requirements kind of get walked backwards into an inadvertent public meeting. And then the other non-intuitive part is non-meeting communication, right? You might say, well, since when is a text a public meeting, or email a public meeting, or a few of us posting on social media a public meeting, but it's really not the venue. It is the number, right? 3 or more, plus the discussion of public business. And so that's why email feels more like a document than a meeting. Right, if there are 3 or more of you having, right, these sort of back and forth discussions and public business, then that is viewed as a public meeting. Same with text. Same if all of you show up on the same Facebook page, right, and start arguing or discussing with each other about matters of public business. And the scary thing about electronic communications in particular is that multiple sets of laws and or legal requirements do apply when we're talking about electronic communications. So we talked about how, right, 3 or more of you email can be a public meeting. Also, those emails are most likely, if they concern public business, covered by the Open Records Act. I don't know if you have ever encountered a situation, and Thad probably has in maybe other communities, where there's just this standing request of the community. I want to see every single email from this date to this date, right, about public business from any elected official of the community. Valid? It is, right? Because it's a document concerning public business. And so, you know, just making the assumption that whatever you type or, right, read into a microphone may end up becoming the subject of an Open Records Act request is really, I think, a prudent way to be. So do you guys all have official town emails? Okay. So then if you were to say, I'll just do a quick side email to my colleague here on my Yahoo account. Yeah, I still have a Yahoo account. At least it's not AOL.
Like. Email.
So, but anyway, so you say, I'm just gonna send my colleague a side email on my first week. And that'll be safe, right? Is that the case?
It's
It's the
Open
content.
Records Act.
Yeah, it's the content of the communication and not where it originated, where it went. And so what that means, if we get an Open Records Act, right, as the town, is, okay, sorry, council member, we're going to have to rifle through your entire personal email account. Wow, who's ordering all these boots? Oh, that would be me. But you know, that's what you would be subjected to. So I think it is important to, you know, both maintain the discipline to make sure that you're hewing to the requirements of the Open Records Act, but also discipline as to where those emails go and originate from, so that it's, you know, not this impossible task to comply with an Open Records Act, if one should be made. So finally, the civil discovery process, right? That's a whole nother set of legal requirements that can apply once there is litigation or could be litigation, right? That your communications will be subject to discovery, or at a minimum, a hold, right? Do not delete any emails because we're going to be suing you pretty soon. That's 3 sets of requirements that apply to written communication. And that's why it's really, especially a tricky area. So quasi-judicial issue. So if you can remember back to when you were first running for office, were you saying to yourself, I can't wait until I'm elected so that I can be quasi-judge? Right? Did that term cross your lips? No, right? It's again one of those non-intuitive elements of being an elected official. The idea that you are a legislator, of course, but you're also a judge. And so you're wearing the hat of the legislator and also at times the black robe of the judiciary. And the trick is to know when a matter is legislative, when a matter is quasi-judicial, because the rules of engagement, each of those matters differs in really almost a diametrically opposite fashion. And of course, high stakes involved in non-compliance with the rules of engagement for especially quasi-judicial matters. This community, right, property values, probably second to none in this state, right, from what I've been reading. And so the stakes are high. You should make a misstep in the quasi-judicial arena. And so that's why Thad and I can't talk enough about this topic. So legislative activities are probably what you contemplated when you were running for office and when you took your office, right? I'm going to be a local lawmaker, right? Passing ordinances, making policy around big picture issues for our community. So legislative activities, now let's kind of analogize you to and I apologize in advance, to the state legislature for a moment. And have any of you visited the Capitol when the legislature's in session? It's kind of a free for all. Oh, well, good. I'll tell you about it. I know. But analogize yourself to a state lawmaker for a moment and kind of consider the environment in which they operate, right? Because do they have to listen to citizens and lobbyists who contact them? Big time, right? Yeah, at least 10, yeah. Right, they're gonna be hit up by lobbyists and by citizens on a continual basis. That's the job of a lobbyist. As citizens, that is one of our rights, right? To come to our duly elected officials and talk to them. Is that okay? Under the gold dome? Yeah, it is. Or let's say you're a state legislator and you want to investigate the issue yourself, or you have a professional background that is directly pertinent, and so you want to bring your professional knowledge to bear. Are these things okay? Investigating yourself, using your own professional knowledge? Perfectly okay. What about legislators talking to each other to try to create a consensus, to bring somebody over to my side? Is that okay for them to do? It is, right?
There's no three,
That,
as long as there's only two.
well, yes, in theory, or there, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Unless it's a concept that I don't know what their excuses are, but yeah. How about, yeah, I think those are pretty much it in terms of activities that are okay, legislators, right? They're expected, they're inevitable, and they're not legally problematic. And then, or what about having like a going in bias, right? I will never vote for whatever this topic is. Like, you can always count on my no vote. I won't even have to read the bill. Is that okay for a legislator to do? Really nice. Right, but it is okay for them to do, right? I remember when I was lobbying for the Colorado Municipal League, that there was one guy who would take his yes button and his no button, and he would like jam a pencil into the no button so that he was always a no, right? He was Mr. No. Was that okay?
It's not okay. The ethics.
Exactly. So I don't even need to turn to the next slide. In fact, I want to keep with these slides and say, okay, now the matter is quasi-judicial. It is a site-specific land use application. It's one example. Do you guys ever get any of them? Yeah. Right. So then you are the black robe of the judiciary. And you're like, Yeah, I am gonna listen to all of the citizens who hit me up at the post office or the grocery store before the hearing ever happens. And I'm going to tote up the yeses and I'm gonna tote up the nos, and I'm just gonna kind of go with whichever has the more votes. Is that okay for you to do in a quasi judicial capacity?
No.
No.
We'll have more to say. Yeah, you talk.
If they come to you at the post office, you
Yeah.
stop conversation about that.
Yes, and you know, I think you can work on a script for that because you don't want to sound inhospitable about it, right, or rude. When in doubt, always blame the attorney is a good one. Or you can say, right, all of us need to have the benefit of your perspective. And the best way to have that happen is for you to come to the hearing and express your views to all of us, right? That would be another way to do it. If there's a process for getting written material into the record, that would be another way to kind of shift those comments away from you at the post office and into a, you know, more appropriate venue. So just kind of think about those and practice them in your mind. And again,
So,
the attorney is the best.
so just to clarify,
Yeah.
the person at the post office or at the supermarket, you know, what I will typically do is I'll try to listen. In most cases, I generally won't shut someone down unless it's like something about an executive session issue or something like that. I won't give them an answer. I might lead on to, you know, how I feel. But I'm just one of seven. I
Here's
can't-
here's the issue.
Yeah,
When you're acting as a judge, you come to the, and this does not apply, she said, for legislative action. This is just the special use approval for business XYZ to be located at such and such a location on Main Street under the criteria of the code for making this decision.
Liquor license.
A liquor license,
Yeah.
say. But liquor licenses don't tend to be awfully political, right? People don't tend to jump you in line at the grocery store or whatever. But the idea is, unlike a legislative decision, you're to come to that decision without bias. Which also means that you cannot hear what is called an ex parte communication. A communication from somebody interested in the decision made outside of the hearing in an attempt to influence you. You know, sometimes you have to get down in the weeds a little bit and say, look, this is scheduled for a public hearing. And that means that if I continue to listen, I want to hear what you have to say. But if I continue to listen to you, I'm going to have to disclose this communication at the public hearing on the record. Right? That's the way, there's nothing wrong, there's nothing intrinsically wrong, illegal, or unethical about hearing an ex parte communication. Right? I wouldn't go out and encourage it, but getting your ear chopped off when you're trapped in the grocery store line, there's nothing wrong with that. But what is wrong with it is bring that information into a public hearing where the other side doesn't have the opportunity to know what it was that was said to you, and the other side doesn't have an opportunity to make arguments against it. So what you gotta tell people is, look, this is, because you're always going to be able to say in this context, there's going to be a public hearing on this, right? There is noticed a public hearing. And that means I'm a judge and I have to hear only the evidence that's given to me at the public hearing. If you keep talking to me, you are putting in jeopardy the very decision that you're trying to. I know it gets down the weeds a little bit, but with some people, you have to say, look, I really want to hear it. But I really have to hear it in the context of the hearing.
And to go further on that, if somebody can prove that the decision was made under those circumstances of ex parte communication, that the decision was influenced, they can challenge it in court and it can be reversed.
Yeah, potentially. And let me add one more thing, right? It's one thing if you and that one person standing right behind you in line, right? And you're kind of just awkwardly trying, right? But let's say 2 or 3 people back in that same line, people with a diametrically opposed view are seeing you talking to this guy. And they may not be close enough to hear what's being said, But they're like, oh my God, these two have their heads together. Right, and they're gonna say 2 and 2 equals 5, right? So appearances also count. And, you know, I think the more these things happen, the more they're allowed, the more people are observing, right? The harder it becomes to dispel, you know, not just the reality, but also the perception, right? That something not right is going on. So, yeah, I would 100% sign on to Ted's recommendation.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I've been in that situation more than once about specific things. And I guess in the past, I've always told them to come to the meeting, you know, I've offered that. And I tell people, come share your perspective, and I back out of the conversation quickly. But then some people are like, oh, I can't go to a meeting, and so then I encourage them to send emails. And I go, if you send me an email, I'm gonna share it with the council, or better yet, pick somebody else and send them the email. Because that way it's gonna get to us. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as there's a process for those emails, then getting into the record of the hearing, right? So, you know, you said just.
What township
Yeah.
is that?
So I just wanna make sure. Because this is the difference between the legislative and the, right?
Yes.
So for instance, Tom, what you said about liquor, the Whole Foods with the liquor thing before.
Yes.
Would have been something
Yes.
not to talk
That was
about,
part of
but quasi judicial.
Yes.
So my take is like Trump, never use emails.
And then something like, you know, deciding whether we have barbecue anymore, that's
Correct.
legislative, that's fine to talk to people.
Yeah, exactly. Excellent. So, yeah, I think we've done sort of the ex parte contact. How about investigating the issues yourself? Sort of related to that is you already have personal knowledge that others may not have for whatever reason. And are related to that, the subject matter of this quasi judicial matter aligns perfectly with an area of immense professional expertise for you and you alone on this council. That never happens.
We're still lucky.
It never especially happens when an attorney's on the council. So those things to me are about information that is not given to you as testimony or other evidence and put into the record of the hearing, right? If you investigate the issues yourselves, then you're not a judge. You might be the prosecutor or the defense attorney, so to speak, but you are no longer a neutral judge if you're investigating the issues yourself.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
So in reference, I think to the Whole Foods, obviously. This, but Sue had something to do with maybe granting them a liquor license. So I do have knowledge of Colorado's liquor laws at a pretty high level. I used to own a wine importing.
Okay, good.
And so I'm very familiar with the laws, and three tier stuff. So if I was on the council at that time, it would be okay for me to say, maybe clarify something, to call the state, some people I know in the state office over there, to investigate it on my own. In other words, to make a call.
No.
Okay,
If you don't hear it,
that's investigating it myself.
But you are gathering evidence that you're going to use to apply to the decision that you make in a quasi judicial context.
Okay.
What you have gathered is evidence that will not be part of the record. So should we turn to the standard of review briefly to understand why that makes a difference?
Pat, can I just clarify that?
Yeah,
sure.
What you could do is you could use your expertise to ask the applicant a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, or you could use your expertise to ask staff a question and ask for more investigation on the part of staff to bring back evidence to the main board.
I have a question with that, as far as we all go, like, if there's, can't think of whatever an example, but if I had questions or wanted more information about a particular topic, can I ask staff, or should I ask Tom to ask staff? What would be the best?
You should always deal with Tom when you can, right, instead of going to a staff.
I mean,
member.
that's what I do, but
Right, right.
I'm just curious,
Now, if you
like,
had. But the prior example, you received an email from a constituent wanting to, providing information, arguing about this quasi judicial decision. Feel free to forward that on to Katie, if it's probably Katie's. But that doesn't, you don't need to, you need to get that to staff, but if you've got questions on, I want more information on, you should go through Tom.
Yeah, I have a suggestion around that. Right, so something I don't think I talk about here, but I think underlies everything that the council does is the idea of sort of equality of power, equality of information, right? Can you guys subscribe to that concept? That each of you sort of has 1/7 of the power of the council? And information is a valuable and important part of that, so that if, you know, one of you is in possession of information that the others don't have, then suddenly that kind of laps over into equality of power, right? You must listen to me, for I am the one with the information, right? So you want to avoid that when you're asking questions of staff. The way it might be handled would be to say, hey, a question I might be asking at the hearing, if you could pass this on to your planning folks, is, right? And then don't speak the answer right then and there. That way they can prepare and all of you will be able to hear.
And to follow that, those that, now I've met with each of you individually, and we do that on a regular basis. I try very hard to make sure when you guys ask me questions, I share the answer with everybody. And share that this question has been asked.
Yeah, beautiful. And so, yeah, related to that, right, you may know stuff because you're long-term committed residents of this community that others may not know. Are you gonna bring that to the table as a decision-making, you know, piece of evidence? Right, if you know something and you feel like it hasn't gotten into the record of the hearing, again, ask the question. Let somebody else testify to that out of their own mouth, as opposed to yours, so that you avoid being a witness. And then this whole area of expertise, I think, is a tricky one, because on the one hand, right, each of you bring valuable experience and expertise to the table, right? It's part and parcel, I'm sure, of why you were elected to this office, right? People know your background and they trust that it will be appropriately used in your decision making. But if you were to wield that as a weapon, and I saw this in a big community where everything on the agenda perpetually was development, right? That's all there was. And there was an architect on the council. And his contention was, right, every single one of these issues is an architecture issue. Therefore, I should have more sway, right, over what you guys think. And he would dominate the discussion around it. And I can see scenarios where, you know, in any one of your, you know, respective professions or occupations, there might be an impulse to do that. So again, think about that in a 1/7 kind of principle, and whether you're kind of trying to, you know, bring all the power to yourself because of this special expertise. Now, at the end of the day, you're expected to be generalist, right, when you're making decisions. You have your subject matter experts, right? And so you rely on them for the subject matter expertise. Of course, asking appropriate questions, probing deep questions, you know, if need be, using your expertise, but not wielding what you know as a weapon. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And then let's see, what else? Lobbying. I'm sure you would never call or email one another and say, hey, yeah, I'm inclined to grant this liquor license. Just wanted to know what you thought before the hearing. Would that ever happen amongst a town council or?
Not this one.
No.
Choice of words there. In how we might lobby each other,
Yeah.
you know, because if we have an issue that we're trying to make happen,
Mhm.
you know, whatever that might be, but this is more legislative, I feel like.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can do that in the legislative.
Yeah, you absolutely can.
It's the quasi judicial decision that discussion needs to happen in the open
Well,
forum.
and let's back up, why is distinction? Bring you back to middle school, right, when they taught us about the separation of powers in our government, right? We divided all the power between the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And what we were taught is that the judicial branch doesn't get elected, and they get appointed, oftentimes for life. They don't have to worry about their jobs, they don't have to worry about politics, and why do you want that? Because you want them being neutral and unbiased, you want them to be these unbiased figures that come in the black robes and look at the facts and apply it to the law. And follow Chief Justice Holmes, and I'm gonna, Chief Justice Holmes, right, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, famous for saying, well, he's famous for saying a lot of things, but one of the things he said that I liked the most was that if the people want to go straight to hell, I will help them get there. That is my job. He wasn't there to decide whether the legislative body had made a good decision, a bad decision, or an indifferent decision. He was there to look at the facts and apply the law and be as honest, as true to that law as he could, right? Not to be thinking about, you know, well, I was a legislator and I helped adopt this law and I really don't like the way this is being applied, even though it meets the letter, right? There's this inherent public evil in having the people who made the law also be the ones who apply it by being judges, right? For that reason, these different rules have been set up to apply to you as a body who sometimes act as a legislative body and sometimes act as judges. And the judges and the law is kind of jealous of that judging provision, right? They're going to make sure that if you're going to act as judges, you're going to act as judges, right? You're going to be unbiased, you're going to be neutral. You're not going to engage in ex parte communication, right? It's sort of I think the law sort of gives this power begrudgingly.
Yeah, so they'll judge you by their standards.
They will judge you by their standards when you're making these decisions.
So a question on the legislative versus judicial, right? That's really where we have to really figure out that gray area and that division. So I'll drop an example and see what you think. So if it was someone coming with a liquor license, right? Let's look up, that would be judicial. Because we're deciding based on the current rules of the town. If there is a motion to remove the kayak park sign at the that Rick and I were talking about at the down at the parking lot, that would be something I could talk to Rick about and say, hey, Rick, what do you think about that kayak sign? Okay.
We'll go into a little bit more detail later in my presentation, but the basics of it is, you know, you're quasi judicial when you are applying a certain set of laws to a certain property or someone's right to use or do something in a way that will ultimately, when you make your decision, will affect this person or this property, but no one else.
Yeah.
That's, and usually, almost always, there is going to be a public hearing. Right, and we call things a public hearing, right? We have a public hearing on the second reading of any piece of legislation. Not really the same public hearing, means you have to let members of the public stand up and talk to you about that piece of legislation. But it's not a public hearing in the sense of a quasi judicial hearing where both sides will make their arguments, maybe present written evidence. You'll ultimately make a decision that is based on findings.
Important point, because sometimes you end up with this shorthand, so there's a public hearing, therefore it must be quasi judicial, but it's not the case, right? The budget will have a public hearing, but that's not quasi judicial. So, yeah, it's a hallmark potentially, but not. So last thing, having strong convictions going into the hearing and not okay, right, in quasi judicial context. You kind of have to empty your mind. You have to set aside any, pre-thinking you may have done, any grudges you may have, and just say, I've emptied my mind, and I expect it to be built, right, with testimony and evidence, which I will apply fairly.
So you can't declare, I will never approve any later.
Yeah. Correct. We have seen that happen.
Sure, it's out.
In the context of elections to council, or people are campaigning on that big land use application that everyone knows is coming and people have been talking for 6 months. And they make a bunch of statements in public and you end up having to rehabilitate them. And if they aren't too awfully, right, if they haven't talked about over their dead body or the like, you can rehabilitate them by just acknowledging in the context of the hearing, so that it's on the record, the statements that were made. In spite of having made those statements, Counselor, do you feel you can nonetheless judge this fairly and impartially and without? Absolutely, I do.
I'm gonna call that the cleansing power of disclosure and waiver, right?
There you go.
If you've said something, and if you have something in your past, right, that could come back to haunt you as a decision maker today, disclose it on the record, right? And say, but I will be neutral and impartial and,
Be neutral and impartial, then don't participate.
exactly, yeah. And then, once you make that disclosure, the mayor as the presiding officer, or possibly, your town attorney will look around the room at the party and say, the objection, and nobody will make an objection. Cleanse. Cleanse. So, keep that in mind. It is though a fix after the fact, right? And as Thad said, it doesn't always work. If you can't say it with a straight face, you shouldn't be saying it.
And we've never had to do it.
Yeah.
So everyone.
So I think we've kind of seen the flip side of these rules of engagement, and Thad actually did a great job of sort of talking about the basis for quasi-judicial rules, and I'm glad he did, because one time I did one of these presentations and the mayor raised her hand and she kind of did one of these numbers on me, and she said, all you attorneys and these quasi-judicial rules, you just put these in place to try to control us, right? I was delighted, man. I was delighted. Because, well,
And your whole profession.
it was really hurtful. Due process at its essence is a constitutional requirement, right? Somebody's property rights can't be affected without a fair hearing or an unbiased decision maker. So these rules carry constitutional import, and that's why the damages are so, potentially humongous. And that's why, Thad talks about it, I talk about it, everybody talks about it. And it's not because we're trying to control you. It's because we are trying to protect your right and your responsibility to participate in the hearing, right? Because bad enough stuff goes on and suddenly you lose your right and your responsibility to be able to participate. And nobody wants that, right? You don't want that. The people who elected you don't want that. And the rest of the council doesn't want that. So that's why these rules are so important. Yeah.
And if I may, so say we start talking about inclusionary zoning,
Yes,
right?
yes.
On one side, it's legislating, on another side, it's affecting property owners.
It's legislating, because when you talk about inclusionary zoning, you're talking about adopting legislative rules that will be generally applicable to everyone. So not applying rules to a specific property that will define how it's applying rules to everyone's property. Now, you may have other legal issues, right? But that isn't one of them in that instance. Now, having done that, let's assume that some aspect of your inclusionary zoning rules left some discretionary decision making. Planning commission, the council. Now, the application that comes in to be decided under those discretionary standards that you adopted legislatively is now a judicial decision. So, and where are you in the process of the discussion? What are you talking? So, but that discussion absolutely legislative. Because it's really no different. I mean, yes, it affects people's property rights. Just like almost everything else you do when you act legislative. Right down to how many parking spaces you've got to create, you've got to have on your own property as opposed to everything.
Good discussion, great question. Thank you for
It
that.
does shift, right? It's different depending on when in time you're talking about inclusionary zoning and what.
Yeah, and then you drill down to one applicant and suddenly the whole nature of the matter changes. So shall we talk a little about social media? Are you?
Makes it a lot easier.
Take it back.
I literally will not do anything political or with the town. on
Yeah.
social media.
Yeah.
Don't engage.
That's a good rule. I would say, post the pictures of your puppy
Yeah.
and be done with it. I think that would be the best advice I could give. But, lots of elected officials have gotten themselves into hot water. They've made the papers around social media management, right? And so it's definitely a thing. At CIRSA, we have paid our share of settlements on behalf of elected officials who got crosswise with, mostly First Amendment type issues because of the way that they handled their social media. So it's a real thing.
Like blocking people from participating in their social media account when they have been using it essentially as a public forum.
Yes.
Is the sort of prototypical example that we see these days is an elected official using their social media site to engage with anyone and everyone who wants to engage with them. But then somebody comes in and, starts punching a little hard and they get blocked.
Yeah.
You can't be on my site anymore and participate. And that person brings a First Amendment suit and gets the money.
And then, it gets to be a lot of fun and you end up going all the way to the United States Supreme Court as somebody did this very term. And I'll talk about it a bit because it is, number one, it's instructive. Number two, it's somewhat helpful in terms of avoiding liability, but also, right, I'll take that away the very second I say that, because there's other considerations involved. So, the Supreme Court did make a pronouncement in March about social media accounts and when you can get into trouble deleting comments or blocking people from making comments at all. So I'm going to talk about the two-pronged test first. And does anybody other than an attorney talk about prongs of a test?
No, but it's great.
Yeah. So it's a two-pronged test to determine whether liability under the First Amendment could apply if you delete or block somebody's comments as a public official on your social media account. So the first prong of this test for there to be liability is that the person doing the deleting or blocking has to possess actual authority to speak on the public entity's behalf on the matter at issue, on the matter about which you delivered that delete or block. Now think about the city council, for instance, right? Like, do I, as one member of 7, have actual authority to speak officially on behalf of the whole town on this matter? So Supreme Court kind of did give us a little present here, right? I'll take it away in a moment, but, and then second prong, the official must purport to be exercising that authority. So not only it must he be exercising actual authority, he's got to kind of show up on the Facebook page or wherever and say, as a member of the council, I am officially utilizing my authority to whatever, right? Again, kind of helpful, right? Because that's the way you talk on social media. Isn't it that? It's being much of that. So it feels like, hey, we got to win out of this.
I feel like we did that.
Again, and there's more to the picture. And let's just call out this dude who got all the way to the Supreme Court because he was actually a city manager. Not an elected
It's much
official.
easier for city manager.
So he, before his appointment as manager, had his personal Facebook page, Abby to Lucy, right? Husband to Jesse, but when he was appointed, he became and city manager, city of Port Huron. And then he switched that page to a public page, and it became, postings that were a mixture of, kids at the playground or whatever, and then pronouncements about the city, seemingly official city surveys. And then people started coming on the page to, right, do what people do, right, troll him. And he first started deleting those trollish comments, and then eventually he was like, I am slapping a block on you. And he went all the way to the Supreme Court. So number one, going all the way to the Supreme Court on anything is a lose for everybody except for the litigant lawyers, right? So it's a lose already. But moreover, there's more laws that apply, right? And so before the Supreme Court decision, we at CIRSA were saying, please use caution, right? Let's, use the thick skin that we have grown as a result of this work. And don't block, don't delete, right? Maybe have some rules in place, but just kind of let it flow. Don't use social media for serious discussions. Those have always been our suggestions. Now, the Supreme Court also gave us another helpful hint, which was use your disclaimers, right? So there's an about me, oftentimes on social media pages. Use that space to say, all opinions expressed here are personal opinions and not any official opinions of any entity, right? The Supreme Court said that could be helpful. So let's do that. But also, our best practices suggestions still remain, right? Just stay off the heavy stuff, stay with the light stuff. And why is that? Because we still have things like tort laws, right? Where if somebody feels like they've been defamed, they're gonna go after you under state law, right? And you're still in the same kind of hot water, right? And then, what
A
else?
side note on
Yeah.
that,
Yeah,
it's a lot easier for you to defend them than it is for them to defend you. Law expects you as public officials to essentially have much thicker skin than the average human being when it comes to being used by others verbally or in writing.
that's the legal standard.
But they don't give you any more leeway to abuse others verbally or in writing. So just understand, there's a double standard going on here once you're a public official.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know if I handled this right, but, so I had a friend who I don't know, contentious, but, we had been friends on Facebook for years. But then just even, it was a couple of months ago, this person tagged me in a post that was like a rant about development in town and just how unhappy they were with the whole overall town's whatever. So I just unfriended them and left that. I don't know. Like they tagged me in their post.
Yeah.
And people were calling me like, hey, did you see so-and-so's post? And I'm like, oh, Lord. And this person had done it to multiple people. They weren't all public officials, just community members. And so I unfriended them and left that whole thing.
Yeah, I don't feel too terrible about that. It wasn't, you got tagged. It wasn't anything you voluntarily did or said. Now, there is I think a mechanism to untag yourself. So that's another thing to do.
Yeah, I did that as well.
Yeah.
And I didn't, but yeah.
So, and then the other thing is, we already talked about this, the Records Act, right? These things are also potentially records. So it's not like the Supreme Court gave us a, free hall pass here. They kind of gave you a free hall pass here. had a few feet closer to the restroom or whatever, but it wasn't a free hall pass whatsoever, so. So legislative versus administrative, do we have just a couple minutes to talk about
We
that?
got about 6 more minutes.
Okay, so this is like the most, simplistic org chart of any community. We start with the ownership, right? The citizens of the community who put you in office. Governance, that's you. And then management. There are department heads and other supervisors, and then there are frontline employees, right? I use this to illustrate 3 things. One, time horizon, right? If you look at your frontline employees, their time horizons are pretty short, right? What do we need to get accomplished today? Right, that's as far as they're looking. You've got supervisors up to managers, right, who are looking further out. What do we need to get accomplished this month, this year? Your town manager probably has a 5-year plan, right, 10-year plan. So his eyes are cast even further out. But of all of the players in this organization, your perspective should be cast the furthest out of any of these players, right? You should be looking 10, 25, 50 years down the line. So to the extent that your time, your attention, your energy are being taken up by what's happening today, right now across the street, right? Or even worse, what happened yesterday, I would suggest that your time horizons are telling you that you might be operating at the wrong level in the organization. The other thing is dealings within the chain of command. I made up this rule myself. I call it Tammy's rule of jumping up or down more than one level organization. Tell me if you agree or disagree that between the governing body and frontline employees, nobody should be jumping up or down more than one level in the organization. So if you're the governing body, with whom should you be dealing? Your direct reports, right? If you're jumping below the level of your direct report, then hey, you're violating my rule.
And the charter, the chairman, says that.
Beautiful. No interference, right? But oftentimes, the jumping up or down kind of takes place right somewhere else. And suddenly you're being contacted. What should you do then? Oh, yeah, employee, tell me more. Direct it to the right person, right? Let them know that that's happening. And say, I'm sure you can expect an answer, but this is not within my purview. So jumping up or down more than one level. And then I'll just.
And I'll tell you, in a small community, that's tough.
It is. Yeah. It is, because people vote for you, right? And they may be employees. And they're like, I have the right to contact you. And you're like, okay, you're putting me in jeopardy under the charter, right? But what happens is every level that gets jumped over gets disempowered, right? It's like, why am I even here, right? If I'm just being jumped over. And so that's why I do think it's an important rule. And then I'll just end with this, the idea of no redundancy, right? So with really most of the admin side of the organization, there's some room or some leeway for people to be able to cover for one another in the event of a vacancy, right? Or PTO or leave of absence, that kind of thing, right? There's enough redundancy in the organization that an employee, right, out on vacation will just kind of take on those responsibilities. Or a department head vacancy, right? People fill in to get those things done. But if your eyes are taken off of the big picture, the grand expanse of the big picture, right? Is there anybody else who can step in and say, okay, well, we'll just fill in for the governing body while its attention is diverted? No, right? There's no redundancy at your level of the organization. And that's why I do feel like this is kind of an important to keep in mind. So, but with that, I'm going to stop with 1 minute or less. And thank you all so much for allowing me to be here. If there are any questions, I'm sure Ed will answer them much better than I.
One thing just towards that,
Yeah.
it's sort of how I operate, really, just for, anybody who hasn't. Like an example, I had a constituent or a real estate agent email me and Tom and Katie and, and Katie engaged And like any time that I will engage there, I always add Tom, I will never just say something to Katie, you know, without Tom being on there because of that chain of command and.
And that goes the other way too. It usually, if an employee will speak to you as a citizen, we would expect that they address their supervisor and probably and their supervisor chain lets us know, lets me know ultimately that that's gonna happen, just so that we're aware.
So super helpful, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all so much.
Thanks, Amy. Safe travels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I did we get the planning commission settled for a minute or two before we get going?
Katie, we're ready to go, except we just see this up. Sorry, I thought Tim, I was thinking
Important. I can't understand it.
Some people are planners, some people are. Some are builders. HTML.
I'm trying to learn that, but I'm trying to. Was,
Yes. It's just not.
but so I bring that, I hit Zoom so that they can see that. Yeah, that's all. Let's change in the view, so.
Develop
Thanks.
Well, it's good to see all of these. That's pretty good. What I have to do is James. Thank you, James.
Yeah, I actually didn't expect that.
You know,
Yeah.
Been here.
Yeah.
All right, you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great, thank you. Yep, perfect. And I can now share my screen, which is awesome.
Perfect. So before we then dive right in, first, I don't know if all the council and planning commission members all know each other, but had some changes. Does it work? Should we do quick introductions around the table? Okay, Rick, you want to start?
Sure. Hi, I'm Rick Aiken. I'm the mayor.
I'm a fisher on the town end.
New council member.
Dan Kibbe, new councilman.
Tain Planning Commission, Living Crystal. I guess we all.
Yeah, okay. Lena, License Planning Commission.
Just Honor Beside Planning Commission.
East Field Planning Commission,
Katie Kent, Community Development Director.
James Form, Specialist,
Lisa Malenko, council member.
David Hill, council member.
All right, and before we have online, our consultants get into this and introduce themselves. April Connolly is online right now. She's also on the Planning Commission, but had to join virtually. And we also have Candace Day as a planning commissioner who will be logging on kind of in the background around 5:30 to join the second. Kelsey Withrow, the chair of the planning commission, cannot attend tonight, but she'll get a good update from staff as well. So I just wanted to do one quick overview and then I'm going to pass it to James, who is then going to introduce our consultants and pass it on to them. Because this is, some of you are very familiar with it, but I know Dan and Martin, this is a little bit new to you in the fact that you weren't here when we sent out the RFP and we hired these guys. We are actually, for community development in the town as a whole, we're doing a comprehensive plan and we're doing a housing strategic plan. So at your next town council meeting, you're gonna have Emily Weber, our principal planner, come to you and provide an overview of the comprehensive plan, what we've done so far, what we're doing, momentum for that project. That involves traffic, infrastructure, economy. A lot of this housing plan is gonna go into the comprehensive plan for the community. So a lot bigger, broader plan is a vision for where the town wants to go. And then concurrently, timing wise, it's a little confusing, but we happen to really want to get this housing strategic plan off the ground, which was per direction and feedback we had from town. So the Summit County, the Combined Housing Authority did a housing needs assessment that was finalized and updated in the fall. And that has addresses needs of the county and the community, focusing primarily on low AMIs, the low area median income. This plan is not doing a housing needs assessment. We know the housing needs from the county and the town. We're fine tuning that to include a little bit more of the middle income. What we hear a lot of the public saying, we make too much to be on your AMI chart, or we're over 120%, but we don't have housing. We're trying to nail those figures. Is there a need? What is the need? Things like that. But the really big part of this plan is the strategic action. And that's what you're going to hear tonight to kind of get you engaged in it, excited about it. There's not going to be very much public input feedback as far as surveys for this. We don't want to fill up the community with surveys. The comp plan is going to have a lot of public input, and there are two consultant teams that are working together to bring housing questions into that one survey. So we're not doing a lot of public input on the housing plan because we have a lot of that from the county needs assessment, and we don't want to bog the community down. So we can ask questions, we can answer questions as we're here tonight. We're always here, but James Gorham is leading this project, so he's going to be your go-to. And with that, I'll pass it over to James.
Since we have some new faces, I'll try to provide a little bit of background information on this plan. So first, why are we doing this? As you all know, housing is a crucial need in our community. It's our number one topic that seems like it's always brought up, right? So specifically in the 2023 Frisco strategic plan, it requests a study of services needed to support existing and additional workforce housing development to offer a variety of housing types for year-round. So how do we do that? Well, what we decided to do is hire a consultant firm to come out and help us out. So the previous council in January of 23 recommended the forming of dynamic planning and science, and they have done several housing needs assessments and take action planning for housing throughout Colorado, and they've also done, California as well. So in doing this, we set up some goals for this plan. So number one is to build off what Summit County did in their 2023 goals. So we're gathering data from that plan, narrowing it down specifically for Frisco. Then we're going to evaluate the goal of having 50% housing units in Frisco occupied by year-round residents to see if that's a realistic number. Should it be higher? Should it be lower? We're also going to evaluate the impact of housing production on Frisco's economy, and it's a guide to create the effective policy and programs to support housing. So we're not just looking at ground up buildings. We're also looking at our programs that we have. Can we create new programs? Can we make our programs that are existing better? What do we need to do to get more bang for our buck and to create the results that we want? So the team is consistent of Dynamic Planning and Science, Triple Point Strategy Consultant, Castlewood Capital, and Western Spaces. As Katie mentioned, this is more, not so much a housing needs assessment, it's an action plan. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna do it? All the results, what we want to be done. So, Dynamic Planning reached out to us. I believe we had 5 in the RFP process that reached out to us. In RFP task response, task 1 was to identify goals and objectives. Second one is the housing needs assessment and fine tuning it to Frisco. The third one is modeling capacity, impacts, and financing. And the fourth one is the actual strategic housing plan. So we've already begun this process. As I said, council approved this in January. We held our first stakeholder meeting in Reno on April 30th. We had good attendance there. We have community stakeholders from a wide variety of public institutions, private sector, just to get everybody's input of what they think we should do moving forward. And we also have 2 representatives from the Planning Commission, 2 representatives from Town Council. So the purpose of today is to meet the consultants. Like I said, they're Dynamic Planning and Science. We're going to review their tasks and timelines and review project deliverables. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ethan and Jeff.
All right, guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to present our project, our progress, our team. And I want to congratulate the new town council members on their election and appointment. I appreciate you guys stepping in and evaluating our project and giving us some feedback today. Our project team includes town staff. And that's really important to recognize is that your town staff is growing by approximately 6 new members, and that's our team. And we're part of your team. You've hired us for this particular project, but I would like to have you think of us as an extension of your staff now. And I really like to integrate ourselves with you guys, making sure that we can complete this project holistically, with the stakeholders that have been recognized already. There's a lot of investment by the stakeholders thus far. As James has mentioned, we've had a couple working groups, but we also have had about 10 interviews, about 1 hour apiece, and a working session that was 4 hours long. So there's been a lot of efforts thus far and a lot of commitment to this project thus far. So that's I just want to recognize the stakeholders today and the town staff. And then the consultant team. I'm the owner of Dynamic Planning Plus Science. You're in good hands. I'm a planner. I'm an AICP certified planner. I started off as an architect, but I got into housing efforts about 10 years ago. I was a ski bum originally in Aspen, and somehow I ended up managing my own firm and developing a team and relationships across Colorado. And Jeff Moffitt here is with Triple Point Strategic Consulting. We got Castlewood Capital, who's going to be doing the financial modeling, and Western Spaces. We got Sarah McLean locally there in Copper that has significant experience doing housing needs assessments. So we developed this team specifically for you guys. And what sets us apart from traditional planning firms in Colorado that conduct housing needs assessments, we do a lot of modeling. And that's important to understand is the Triple Point Strategic Consulting does a lot of economic modeling. What happens after we tell you what you need? Well, that's when a lot of housing plans kind of fall off or stay on the shelf, basically, and they don't tell you an additional story of what is needed, what is the economic impacts from that need, what are the environmental impacts from that need. What is the financial modeling pieces that you need? What is the capital? What is the land equity that you need to develop the housing in your area? So I believe that's why our team was selected. We have a lot of different skill sets that we brought together specifically for housing needs assessments and modeling of those housing needs assessments across Colorado. We have been working on the Western Slope in Region 10, which was a 5-county area. And so we've done similar efforts in Colorado. The project timeline, it's a pretty heavy lift. The RFP was issued on November 10th. Responses were provided on the 29th of November. We were under contract by January 9th. We have a 10-month period of performance. We are definitely crunching this down. And like Katie mentioned, in order to get this timeline crunched down, we're kind of omitting that public outreach component because it's going to be taken care of by the comprehensive plan. And a lot of our work is to be completed by November 1st. When our work is completed, that's when the implementation starts on a lot of our plans. And that's important to understand. I'm going to continue to talk about implementation. And that's important because we put this plan together for you, and it needs to be managed and reevaluated on a continual basis to make sure that your housing needs are met through beyond the project period for performance. Some of the major project milestones are happening, have happened, and are continuing to happen as we're modeling this month and next month, etc. But we've addressed some of we have assessed the needs and done a brief overview of the Summit County Housing Needs Assessment that Katie mentioned. We're touching up some of those numbers, making sure that it represents the valid need of Frisco's specific housing needs, making sure that we have adjusted localized numbers for housing, for income levels, rental versus ownership models, etc. We've conducted listening sessions, like I mentioned, over the last couple months. And then we had that stakeholder working group that some of you had participated in last month. Now we've validated some of those needs. I'm going to showcase some of those needs in the following slides. But we're moving into that modeling component. That's really important for you guys to understand is what can the land or the inventory that you have on the ground, what can the land hold? What's the holding capacity? And we call that build out modeling. And then after we understand what the land can hold, we might need to make some adjustments to densities or other types of development potential that you may occur in the area. We also are going to, during the next couple months, we're going to model the economic impacts, and then we're going to showcase those impacts during a stakeholder working group number 2, which some of you have been invited to already. So May through July, we're throttle is down on the car, and we're making sure that we can meet our period of performance, and then also. This is when we start showcase after the modeling, we'll start to showcase some of the products and some of the visuals and some of the data, some of the decision making, and some of the management and strategic plan that will develop after the modeling is done in June. You'll be able to take a swipe at it, ask us questions again when those products come out. So we'll be presenting those in June, July, and August. We'll be putting the plan to bed in November. Hopefully we'll gain some adoption and go into implementation thereafter. Some of the core considerations. I like that graphic that the previous presenter, the planning governance, right? So housing plan governance. Where does it start? Does it start at the workforce level? Does it start with Emily as a principal planner? Or does it start with James? So we're going to understand where the housing plan governance resides, right? That's one of our core considerations beyond modeling is when we go into implementation, where does the strategic housing plan get governed? We want to understand your capacity and expertise. That's important to understand. And we have Michael Leahy with Castlewood Capital, and he's really an important member of our team to understand your capacity and expertise on your financial modeling side. What kind of financial techniques are you using to get a project off the ground? So that's one of our core considerations is your capacity and expertise in developing housing. Program management, that's another piece. That's part of that implementation piece. How are you managing your programs? What can you do better? And then also the public involvement and ongoing education. How can you educate the public on how they can develop ADUs or junior accessory dwelling units to take care of some of the housing needs on their property? So there's a public involvement in education, ongoing education piece that could happen after the plan. And please interrupt me with any questions. The planning process, I'm just going to lay out a couple steps for you today. I have an error on this. I obviously can't count 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3. It's actually supposed to say 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, we're assessing the needs. We've completed that. How much and what type of housing is needed for whom and at what prices? Those are the questions we've validated thus far with some data points. And then we also are a validation of need through stakeholder outreach. Like I said, we've done 10 interviews, we've done a working session. So we're validating that the need against the data. So we've completed that. And then step 3, modeling and process. We're weighing the housing need against available land. Like I mentioned before, that holding capacity of the land at your current density, at your current policies. What do your current policies limit? So that's the holding capacity. And then we want to weigh that the housing need against the associated impacts. So what are the water impacts? What are the consumption impacts for water if we do develop the housing that's needed? And then again, that financial and pro forma modeling is super important, and that's where Michael steps in with Castlewood Capital. And then we're going to develop a plan, establish goals, identify and prioritize housing policies and programs. Rainey, one of our staff, is going to be really looking at some of your impediments to housing, some of your constraints to housing. Maybe there's some policies in place that restrict the availability or ability for a developer to come in and pencil out a project and get doors on the ground. And then step 4 is I really wish to put a plan together for you that has measurable objectives. How many units are you developing a year? How many ADU units are you developing a year? And we can judge how are you guys performing against the objectives that we set. So I always like to set measurable objectives and then also identify funding partners, etc. And also come back and edit this plan as necessary. The market changes quite often. We've been looking at the market this morning and looking at some new information that's coming out on houses sold or secondary homes being sold in the area, and it's diminished quite significantly due to interest rates. So how do interest rates play into this? So assessing the need, I'm just going to go briefly over some of the stakeholder perceptions versus data. We are assessing the needs currently still. We're, like I said, we're kind of coming down on the data side on the needs assessment. But what we've developed as part of assessing the needs, we have developed an outreach strategy that's really important to us. Project branding. We've completed a website. It's up and live. Katie mentioned that we're not doing a lot of outreach, but we still need to inform on every project that we do, making sure that we have consistent messaging between the the strategic housing plan and the comprehensive plan. So we developed a brand, a project website. I don't know if you've seen the social media that came out today, but we're releasing social media to make sure we inform your public of what we're doing to increase transparency. And so you can go to the friscohousingplan.com and we'll illustrate some of the information from the planning effort to the public. We may not have a large engagement process, but we can certainly provide transparency in the process by letting the public know what we're doing and what do the numbers say. What is the strategic plan gonna mention? As part of assessing the needs, we've conducted 10 listening sessions. We still have a couple more to go. They're about a 1 hour apiece. We organized a stakeholder group with town staff, and we've conducted the stakeholder working group number 1. So during those listening sessions, we found that this is no eye lifting or surprise to me that housing is a regional issue. Consistency across jurisdictions is super important, right? Full spectrum of housing has been mentioned multiple times during our listening sessions. The missing middle, families and ordinary people, right? I think that, you know, our ski towns, our mountain towns, sometimes we have a hard time providing housing for that full spectrum of families and ordinary people. workforce housing. This is, we mentioned this a lot in a lot of our plans. Sometimes we look at the workforce only, like if for Region 10, we only looked at the workforce. How can we support the workforce? Because the market will take care of itself. The 120% AMI and beyond, the market will take care of those folks. But how are you taking care of your workforce? I had a conversation early on with Katie. Some of your planners that are working for the city for the town of Frisco are not making enough to live and own, have an ownership model in Frisco as well. So how are you taking care of your workforce? There's a long-term trend of redevelopment for higher end homes, obviously. Sentiments of NIMBYism, that's not in my backyard. It's not government's role, lack of developable land, some infrastructure constraints. But you know, for you guys, I think that some of the listening sessions we heard, kudos for the folks that are in the room today, but there's generally positive political will for housing. So that's important. Sometimes there isn't. And we'll get engage some of your opinions here in a bit. I'm going to speak now, and then we'll engage with you here at the end of the conversation. But you have a unique community and neighborhood feel. I totally understand that you have a strong tourism base at the same time. So how do you balance those needs between that unique neighborhood feel and that strong tourism-based economy, and then the inclusive values? So you want to include that full spectrum of folks, but how do you do that? That's really hard. And that's why we're here today. For the listening sessions, a variety of tools, potential solutions. There's a variety of tools out there. You have a good team in front of you. Your team has grown significantly with us on board, but we'll provide some of those tools. We'll pick from those tools out of the toolbox and make sure they get into your plan, those financial modeling pieces as well. Potential solutions is preserve and increase utilization of your existing stock, adaptive reuse, we call it. Potential solutions also include inclusionary zoning, densification, mixed use developments. So there's a lot of things that have changed on the spectrum of housing. It's not just single family residential homes and a commercial center. There's a lot of mixed use development going on and densification going on in a lot of communities. Prioritization of infrastructure services for workforce housing. So how do we prioritize the infrastructure to some of those properties that could serve as workforce housing? We want to prioritize housing for existing residents. That was part of the listening sessions. Looking at the public service workers, balance economic, recreational, and tourism growth with housing needs. Again, that's that balance between tourism and your local community. During our, this is a picture from our working session. I thought it was an awesome conversation. Some of you folks were there. I really get jazzed up about housing and what your thoughts are and how you experience housing. But one of the key takeaways was housing is infrastructure. That's what we kind of took away. I was like shocked that we've never thought of that before, is that housing is infrastructure like water, electrical grid, and other critical infrastructure. So I encourage you to think of housing like another piece of infrastructure that provides fabric in your community. And we could talk about that a little bit, is if we don't have housing for your workforce, that fabric kind of goes away in the community. Rentals are a huge part of the need. Not everyone is suited for ownership. That's important to understand. And perceptions that Frisco is racing towards build out. Are you guys racing towards build out? And that's the questions that we're going to answer. Do we have enough land? I don't know. I have to look at all your underutilized parcels, all your open vacant parcels. I understand that there is a perception out there, but can we densify? Can we do other things to make sure that we don't race towards build out? There is a mention of creating succession or turnover in your affordable housing projects. So once somebody lands into your affordable housing project, it seems like that they're there for a decade before they move out of that subsidized rent or deed restricted house. So how can we create succession, right? Let the next person move in and get that subsidy. Is Frisco alone in the cause, or are we a part of a greater housing challenge in the 10-mile basin and beyond? That's important to understand. Are we going to do this on our own? Are we going to do this with considerations of all the players that are out there, like Dreamers and the Summit County Housing Authority, et cetera. And so that's important to understand as we move into developing a strategic plan. Are we doing this alone with your own resources, with your own financial modeling, or do we need help from others? And those are some of the questions I would like to ask today. And now there's a lot of data points, right? I'm not going to feed you a bunch of data today. I think I want to open up a conversation of what your thoughts are on housing and what is government's role in housing. But we can give you some of the spectrum of the housing needs in Frisco. This is called a housing bridge. We Sarah with Western Spaces used this graphic a lot in her plans. I really love how this illustrates the need between very low income all the way up to the higher income categories and the AMIs and where they land. And that's average median income. So is somebody making 30% of average median income, that's supportive housing, if 30% and below. And then the range continues on up, and you can see that you can look at your core housing targets, right? And so the core housing targets are in blue on this illustrative diagram. So we're looking at from left to right, we're looking at income categories, and we're looking at the blue categories on this diagram, and the percent of current renter households. That's your current percentage of where your housing targets reside, right? So percent of current renters and households within, this is Frisco centric, right? So 25% of your current renter households are in deeply subsidized rentals. 17% are in affordable rentals, 20% are in rentals or entry-level homeownership categories. So, and then if you look at the percent of current owner households, so 9% are at between 80 and 10% AMI, 15% are at 100 to 120 AMI, and 11% of your households are in that 120 to 150 AMI. So we're seeing a two-person household, we're seeing rents up to $2,400 a month, and a purchase price, this is affordable, purchase price up to $462,000. And I have a lot of data behind these slides. There's really no purchase prices in these ranges. And so we really need to look at subsidized or deeply subsidized rentals or ownership models to make sure that we can hit some of these income targets for your residents, especially your workforce housing. So how many additional units are needed to address deficiencies for residents and support the labor force to sustain businesses, right? We're looking at our increase in employment categories. So when we're looking at assessing the need from the data perspective, we're looking at catch up and keep up needs. Well, you're going to hear a lot of that in this report, catch up and keep up. So we need to catch up to with your unfilled jobs in the area. Your jobs might be unfilled because we don't have housing in the area to accommodate your workforce. And then keep up needs through 2029. So we're gonna talk about catch up and keep up in this report. Catch up is existing needs. We need the functional market, functional rental market is we need 157 existing needs is 157 units, right? And then keep up needs, future needs is 247 units. So the total housing units needed through 2029 is 409 units in the Frisco area. And that's based upon market conditions, employment, what you have now on the ground. And I have some backup slides if we need to go there. But you have 229 planned in the area. And so that's your pipeline. You have 229 units planned in the pipeline. So your remaining needs 180 units. And so how do we place those 180 units in the inventory or in the build out analysis? How do we get there? How do we justify density, increased densities in certain properties, et cetera? And it's a little different. Like Katie mentioned, we have the 2023 Summit County housing needs. Our numbers are a little different, and we're adjusting our numbers because we can really do a deeper dive into your housing needs assessment. Any questions, guys?
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
What is what you're saying, this need is in the Frisco area, so is that outside of Frisco?
No, this is just your within town, within the town of Frisco. This is your employment in the, yep. This is not the region, this is not a regional perspective. This is, we pulled figures just for the town of Frisco.
Okay, and the 229 units in the pipeline, are those deed restricted or all?
All, yeah, and I have backup slides on this, but yes, that's all units. And so I have, if we need to go there, do you want me to go there? You can go there.
I mean,
Yeah.
And then I'll just remind everybody, we only have till 6 o'clock. So, yeah, 24 more minutes-ish. So
Okay.
I don't let you decide if you want to go there or finish and then.
Yeah, and you'll have plenty of time, and if you have other questions, we can engage with you with an additional meeting or whatever you need to do. I can send you backup slides as well. So what we're trying to say is we need to ensure a range of housing types, right? That your workforce housing, your families, your single family or whatever types of residents you have in your community, we need to provide housing for, whether it's rental or ownership models. So modeling, I talked a lot about modeling in the beginning, where we need to weigh the housing need against available land, right? And development impacts. If we don't have the water to develop housing, then we can't even start there, right? We need to understand the development impacts. However, we first need the available land. And so our modeling approach includes estimating the housing need. That's called the housing needs assessment. We need to capture that pipeline, right? Those 229 units. What does that look like? What does that mix look like? Is that pipeline all 120 AMI or 120 plus AMI? Or what is that pipeline doing in that market doing? So we need to capture that pipeline. We estimate the remaining need with the pipeline in mind. And then we estimate the land inventory to build the remaining need. Now, do we have enough land? If not, we have to model some scenarios. Are we increasing density exclusively on town-owned land, or are we looking at underutilized land or vacant land that's not owned by the town? So we'll start to be looking at some of your inventory that's out there, and it may not be owned by the town. Modeling approach continued. We estimate the impacts. We estimate the fiscal impacts, direct, indirect, and induced economic impacts. So what happens when we build these houses? What are the direct, indirect, and induced economic impacts? So there's going to be fiscal impacts. There's going to be tax revenue. There's going to be employment generation as you develop this housing. As all your labor coming from Leadville to develop this housing, there's going to be employment generated from actually building the housing. And what is your environmental impacts, your water consumption, your greenhouse gas effects? So we can estimate this with NPLAN. And then this is the important piece. This is why you hired our team. We can estimate your fiscal resources. What's the capital stack needed? What's the subsidies needed to build 180 units? And then what's the required equity, land, and capital? So we get into that financial modeling, and Mike will work with you guys to develop public-private partnership models, illustrate them, how are they working with the current grant funding that's out there. So he'll develop and work with you on some of your financial modeling and your performance. So that's important to understand, is that we're not just walking away when we say you need 180 units. Well, this is how it can actually work, and this is the highest and best use of the land based upon the current day grants and subsidies and equity available from the state. So here's that modeling approach again. Step one, we're looking at housing needs by AMI. We're looking at pipeline by AMI. And we're looking at remaining need by AMI. And then we develop scenarios for that remaining need, right? And some of that includes accommodating growth on town-owned land exclusively, right? So are we only looking at town-owned land as part of this effort? Can the town accommodate 180 units on existing town-owned land? Those are the questions that we're going to answer. But I think I have a conclusion already when I'm looking at some of this diagram. So if I'm looking at scenario A, right, there'll be a scenario B and C in the plan. We can't accommodate growth on, or can we not accommodate town-owned land, growth on town-owned land? Maybe, but when I look at this diagram and this map, this was provided to us by James. If we look at some of the properties on here, so we need 180 units, right? I'm gonna go through each one of these. And we're looking at Uncle John's farm stand, right? Uncle John's farm stand is owned by the town. 16, we can accommodate 16 units out of the 180 units at the current densities. We can accommodate 8 units at the empty lot, snow storage parking lot. We can accommodate 3 units at this very small vacant building, or this very small vacant land. So, and again, 3 and 6 units. I don't think that adds up to 180 units. So we're gonna have to look at other ways to accommodate those 180 units that is needed by your Frisco workforce. So that's important to understand, is I can already see in a crystal ball that we don't have enough publicly owned land to accommodate the growth that's needed, or accommodate the employment growth or the workforce in your town. Key considerations and discussion points. I gave you a little story, a little glimpse of where we're headed, but I wanted to go into your key considerations and discussion points. And I'll take some questions if you have any now, and then we can go into discussion points. What do you guys think? That was a lot of information. That was a lot of talking. But I want to hear from you now. Any questions?
Just to clarify key considerations, the NHP projects are already complete when we're looking at what's available, correct?
Those were under the pipeline
Yeah.
for the rental units, correct? Yep.
Are you talking about these projects here? The pipeline
No,
project?
Those, there are 602 Galena and 101 West Main that we've talked
Okay.
about, so.
Okay. Oh yeah, that's in the pipeline. Yes, sir. Okay, I kind of wanted to sense where your government is headed, right? And I want to get a sense of what is your role? And this is an open platform discussion because it's going to guide us in the scenario planning and guide us in strategic planning efforts as we develop this plan over the next 10 months or so. But one of the key considerations I would really like to hear from you, what is government's role in housing production? And I know that some of you are more verbal and more shy than others, but maybe someone can take a swipe at this and illustrate what your thoughts are and what government's role in housing production is. And I'll just leave the floor open. Raise your hand, or Katie, I don't know if you can call on somebody. I just want to understand what you think government's role in housing production is. It's a big question.
Just part of that saying, we have a housing fund, and we collect about $3 million a year in revenue in that housing fund. So clearly past councils have said we have a role.
I mean, we have a housing authority.
We have a housing authority, correct?
And those were ballot measures, so it's not just,
It's-
the Summit County voter voted those in.
So it is some of our responsibility to be handling this, but to what extent? And, how wealthy are we for the need? Right? I don't think we're actually, yes, we're collecting 3 million a year, but we're not necessarily gonna meet the need of 400 some odd units by what date? So personally, and I've said this during these meetings, how can the government partner with private industry and get some of these large corporations who are reaping the benefits from being in our space to take on some of this responsibility?
Well, to be clear, we as a government shouldn't be building. That, it's a field of homes or field of dreams, if you zone it, it will come. So I'm wondering, who's online? I'm wondering, in your experience, have municipalities, I mean, we have places, let's say, where we want to see development. Let's say there's X property that we want to see developed, and we know how we want to see it developed. I mean, maybe it is that we actually put a complete plan out that show these many units, this much square footage, increase the density, reduce the parking, do whatever we can. And then put that out to the deeper pockets, the insurance monies, the people that are investing. And I'm just wondering if the man behind the screen has ever seen municipalities put out a full-fledged plan up for bidding or acquisition, is what I'm trying to get at.
Our model in the past has been bringing the land, putting it out to RFP, and the private entities bring the project. So it's not too dissimilar from what you're describing.
I would take it even further. I mean, I would flesh it out to say that the planning commission, if you build this is gonna be an approved project. Put some background work into it so that developers who we have here, who don't have the deepest pockets for ownership, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get something built to single ownership. Let me go backwards, because I think rentals is the sore point of our economy, because we are such a transitional workforce. Like there was one slogan up there, ownership is not for everybody. I mean, we all know that, and we keep pushing, affordable units for sale, and there's a place for a for sale product. But I think that when we see the 101 Main and we see the one in Galena go, I think that's going to fill up pretty quickly, and that'll be the writing on the wall that if we can. And again, I'm just kind of slinging against the wall here, but I'm sitting here quiet. I don't like to be quiet too long. So, I mean, I just think it's a kind of a different way to go at it, where you can fashion a development and then put it out there and then see what comes back from it.
Great discussion, yeah.
What I'm hearing is the land, right? If we have land. Pardon me, let me back up, right? So if we're gonna finish our plans, it's a public document available to anyone. Those folks come forward with projects. This is the typology that we're looking for. Here's our plan. Bring it back to us. Although we're bringing in money every year, we're not other towns in the same county with 10 times our budget. We only have limited funds to do certain things. And I hadn't seen anything in this plan yet, which I'm sure we'll get there. The infill is where the opportunities are here in Frisco. The redevelopment opportunities here, where a lot of this is going to come from. There's not a lot of open space available. It's there, it's more than we all know of, I'm sure of it. That said, it's easy to look around town and see the infill opportunities, and I think a mix of whether it be AMIs for rent for sale is the sweet spot. We're never going to be perfect, right? Nor is Frisco going to build Summit County's housing solution. Right, it's a regional effort that needs to take place. So with this, we decided to, right, as you guys know, we're looking at what Frisco's needs are. What are Frisco's abilities to help meet those needs? And this plan can drive us towards that.
Yeah, I see the infill clearly and the redevelopment. I mean, infill and redevelopment. And if we look at the category of that population that could be homeowners, well, maybe it's to build a product where you build them from the get-go, a unit with an ADU, so they can be an owner and a landlord. I mean, and I think that can happen, because the house part doesn't have to be giant. It doesn't have to be the 3,000, 4,000 square foot that we've seen, and I think that's a really nice mix of a product to give to somebody to really get a foothold. And then again,
Can I interrupt? So are you saying that we should have some property that we build a house and an ADU for somebody?
No, that we show that plan as a buildable opportunity. I clearly believe that government is not a builder. I mean, I just don't, you know, you're an instigator of building and you're trying to show and put out there opportunities where profit is what drives housing on the one side. I mean, that's why you don't see rentals. We haven't seen rentals come before planning for years until we have this partnership with NHP. Because they're a nonprofit and they're a single occupant, you know, they're a single owner. I mean,
Put the land into the deal.
yeah,
And the difference being is if we could actually start looking at workforce housing as infrastructure. Because the problem is it's only looked at as profit. Right, and this is why we don't have workforce housing. And so how can we change that paradigm to, and we have to do it within town hall first in order to be able to put out, so, you know, RFPs for developers to come in and develop. And yes, I think what you're saying is, you know, we need to make whatever zoning and code changes in order to make higher density or whatever it is that when we have the plan saying that, you know, this is what we need, X, Y, and Z, and then we put it out to developers. The thing is developers can't make enough money, especially on rental 30 to 80% AMI units. There's no way. It has to be subsidized. And at this point, it will only be subsidized by the government.
right, so on the bigger scale, you know, these are like infill products. But if there's something bigger, like insurance companies don't have the same profit driver and they have more money. So if we can get, you know, that kind of large capital, which is, there was a capital group listed up there. I mean, that's where, I mean, there's still that giant piece on Third. Hopefully we can do a joint venture there.
It's 17
I didn't want to use names.
Well, that's just what that one's called.
Yeah, so, yeah, I mean, that's the kind of piece that we could fashion, a complete turnkey operation where you get investable money with developers to build it, and then it gets owned long-term by not a nonprofit, but a lower profit, you know, incentive group.
Correct. So, you know, I think for us, the only issue has been, we've never seen anybody want to do that other than NHP, right? And now we actually have a couple developers knocking on our door to try to do that. Right, so this is all new, this is all new territory. I don't think you're wrong here, but what I disagree with personally is just that government needs to subsidize it. You know, I mean, so developers want to do it now where we didn't before, because we're profit driven. But in order to be able to complete these projects, we need to fund it. And that's, so how can we get other insurance or whatever entities to fund these things as well? I think that's just an important question in there, because we don't have enough.
Yeah, as part of this planning effort, we're gonna be looking at each property, tier 1, tier 2, town owned, and then looking, though it's owned by a private individual, we can look at it as a tier 1 property because it's underutilized. It has one house on a 5-acre lot. Those infill opportunities will go through the town staff with and look at that highest and best use for each property, and making sure that we can give you a roadmap to that property and looking at the best financial models that are out there. So that's something that will be in this plan. And what is the unit yield based upon this AMI mix or the rental versus, is this a good property for rental? Is this a good property for ownership model? And we can tell you with a pro forma, and you can use that pro forma to kind of do discovery on that property and continue discovery, right? That's something important to understand.
Question, just we only have a few minutes left.
Okay, this is a good question. We may not have enough time. If you want to write your answers to me via email, that'd be a really good way to do this. But if modeling determines that there's insufficient publicly owned land to accommodate need, should policies be crafted to 1, increase densities, 2, relocate a portion of open space towards housing infrastructure, reallocate a portion of your open space towards housing infrastructure or expand town boundaries? So what if you're out of space? What if like the sentiment that I mentioned before, you're racing towards build out? What is your consideration towards one of these three types of moves?
I don't think expand town boundaries is even like on the table for us.
Okay, off the table.
My personal, I don't know.
I think the people that don't live in town probably agree with you too.
Like, I think reality is open space is also. Yeah, you could annex Lake Hill, like that is absolutely.
That has not been an option because of the owners of Lake Hill. Just to do that.
Yeah. Now I think they can legally annex an adjacent land, I thought, but I don't know.
That's the only way you can go,
Yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah.
Everyone's saying, because.
What's that?
So it's not much of a.
Open space, we don't have much open space. Our open space is parks. And like, do we want to fill in parks with housing?
Not without a vote, you don't.
We don't have. And the other place I can think of open space is Willow Preserve or whatever, we don't wanna fill in those willows.
I think that's wetlands too.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So we end up falling into.
We have a hand raised, Candace.
Hi there. Yeah. Is there an option for policy changes that support different types? I think there's increasing density, but are there policy changes that promote like that upward mobility from those different AMIs or those rentals to ownerships?
So like the inclusionary zoning, is that, so yeah, I was gonna add, so if there's other options out here, this is what's on the table right now, but there's other types of programs that are out there that help. It's called inclusionary zoning, so incentives. Waiving, you can't really waive water tap fees according to Katie, so can the city pay for the water tap fees with inclusionary zoning? So if the city pays for this, you get this, incentivize development for infill development. So inclusionary zoning, I would call it, or inclusionary housing, you would call that. So do I hear a vote for increased densities? To maybe raise your hands? Like, is that the way you would go?
I think that's a sensitive one because generally in Summit County, anytime you increase just unrestricted market rate density. That's to second homeowners, maybe you'll get 1 out of 10 that's gonna go to a unusual situation. So I think increased density with the caveat of restriction or some type of restriction.
Seems like trying to make our existing housing inventory more efficiently used.
Okay.
Is something that, I think when you look at all the empty beds in Summit County on an annual basis and you realize that we have enough housing in this county, we're just not using it properly. Maybe that's an option for at least a 1A to say, how can we better use our existing density to meet our housing need rather than just try and build our way out of it with more density.
That's, you never build your way out of a traffic situation either, right? So.
Well, to back Andy up, I want to say that I was going to ask you, is increased density, that would include, let's say, just bed spaces, rooms out there in private homes now that are not being utilized, so that there was public policy that could incentivize people to utilize it. Would that be included in that increased density? Or are we only talking about building increased density?
But town density will always be a unit, so like a kitchen has to be in it to be called a density, a unit, but that is a good point. And Ethan has a lot of approaches he wants to bring in as far as junior apartments and a lot of different things, which aren't density, but bring in the best. Yeah, good question.
So right now your maximum densities is 16 units per acre across the board. And some of your projects have come in at higher densities than that based upon bonus densities and negotiations for development agreements. And so, right around, you know, what if we were to increase it by 4? I could show you products between 16 and 20 units per acre, and you're not gonna see much of a difference between those products, right? Like visually, right? And so that's something to consider is that the visual impact may not be significant as folks think between 16 and 20, but it might buy you a lot of room in your build out. So that's something that we can discover if you want us to.
We're much higher on density on like NHV, are we not?
We are in the CDOT lot that's currently built, use density bonus to get higher density, so it's being done. And that's where these questions are going is. You're gonna get a plan that potentially is going to show you if you wanna meet the needs of housing for the town, you need to consider. Open space development, which sounds like it's not gonna be feasible, and we wouldn't consider it our wetlands and floodplains, and they know that too, but. We're bringing you into like, it's going to have to be density or expanding land, or these are the things, but we don't want you to be shocked. That you're going to get these scenario plannings and be like, why did they just do this for us? Like, that's where these questions are kind of leading into.
Yeah, we're trying to gauge so that I really want us to get driven to the right things that you want in your plan. And this is just one engagement piece where we've worked with the stakeholders and we're working with town staff, and that's important to understand. We're not just doing this in a box. And we work with a lot of communities across the United States too. So we'll bring ideas, but it sounds to me like you want to stick in your box. You want to maybe come up with programs and inclusionary housing within your footprint, right? Let's work there first and then see how we can manage that infill, manage those densities, and making sure that we can maybe come up with those, look under the couch cushions, right? That's what I've done with the city of Napa, looking at each one of those properties, and we find a dime here, a penny here, and then we have 2,600 units, right? That's what Napa's workforce housing was, 2,600 units. We're talking about 180 units, so maybe we can find it.
So from the standpoint of the build out scenario, we had quite a bit of private land on Summit Boulevard that in build out is built out at one level, the commercial property. Do we consider density in that zone as a place in a redevelopment scenario as opposed to build out?
Yeah.
And getting commercial or adding?
Oh, no. Yeah. You will never say here. So.
Yeah.
Base camp.
Could be.
Jeff, you got a comment?
These and all, which we've been talking about, buildings can't handle it, so it's like, either rip down the building and then build up. So that's expensive.
Yeah, let me answer like a little bit of that question. So what we're gonna do, like I mentioned, those tier 1 properties, that's vacant land, right? There's not much left of it. And then the tier 2 is that one house on the 2 acres, one house on the 3 acres. That one house is maybe dilapidated and it's prime pickings, right? And then the tier 3 is that, you know, the lot is completely covered with, you know, one story commercial building or 1-story building. That's really hard to redevelop because you have that demo cost and reconstruction cost. It drives the square footage cost up, price per square foot up. So tier 1 vacant land, tier 2, you know, the underutilized land, tier 3 is those pieces that are not so right for the picking. That we'll put that in the plan as well. Jeff.
Me, those one-story commercial buildings are underutilized land.
And if you leave the zoning on it, you will make it pencil out to
Yeah.
come in and redevelop the land. Right now, it doesn't pencil to rebuild because you can't build it to its highest and best use. But if we can fix the zoning on there, we don't have to do anything else. People will come in and redevelop it the way we rezone it because we can create just incentives just in what we allow people to do. So you wouldn't have to necessarily subsidize it if you just get the zoning.
Well, is Silverthorne like a model of that because of the factory stores that they're ripping down? You know? And what are they doing with them? You know, are they putting commercial out there? But you know, the ones they're doing, what's their model? What's their plan on that land? Now it's just sitting. they demolished it. Raw land, that's commercial underneath, are they doing condos above it, or workforce housing, or?
I know that the first piece that got turned down, the Green Village of the outlets, that's gonna get turned into mostly residential with a commercial
Yeah.
component.
It's residential, you know, market residential or.
Yep.
So,
Jeff, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna just follow up on what you mentioned, Katie, about setting expectations for what the council and the planning commission will see in the future with, you mentioned, building on housing and open space or increased density. And I just wanted to kind of remind everyone that we're really, talking about modeling here. So, we can model increased density, we can model converting some open space without actually doing it. You can look at the trade-offs and decide, what it basically informs the town's decisions in terms of being able to evaluate trade-offs that are quantified. So at the end of the day, you'll have a plan that'll be based on this information and simulating the different scenarios. So we believe in the end, you'll feel like you've made the best choice and the plan will make that choice. But along the way, you may see some things that, don't sit well or don't smell well. So that's the process.
Thanks, Jeff.
So we have about another 8 minutes left. We have to get to one more topic before we go into a break. As part of this process, I have it, and Katie, please tell me, the 100% deed restricted workforce building code that we created, right?
Yep.
Is that 16 per acre? That doesn't sound right.
If you have an entire property, the entire development on the property is up to 120% AMI, you get the incentives and you get bonus density. So if a project is proposing 100% affordable up to 120%, then yes. What we hear from developers, and I think the council is hearing, is if you don't have some mix to help with that rate to get the market to sell a couple of units to bring in more of their investment, that's the tricky part.
And my point in bringing that up is, as this process goes through, I'd like to see tools that we already have in place utilized. And if they're not meeting the need, recommendations for other tools to use. Because I didn't hear it, I haven't heard that.
Yes, that is a big part of this.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's along with, that's kind of why we postponed also a housing restrictive covenant that a lot of you are aware we've been approached and we should be looking at. We don't want to modify it and then modify it again. We're really looking for the feedback from this. Like, I think what we've seen we're gonna get is really gonna help us in all aspects of what we're doing and how to make it better, including code changes. And the advantage of this timing, and I'll keep this short, we're gonna get this, we're gonna move into the comp plan wrap up. Therefore, our vision for the comp plan should take into account, for example, change zoning in the Summit Boulevard area to allow this. And then next year we go ahead and we look at that as an action item that came from this into the comp plan and then into what we actually do to show we have a reason for why we're doing it. Yeah, so.
Because if we look at through the comp plan outreach component, right, we're gonna discuss, I forget the numbers. We have 250 in the pipeline, we need another 180. We just approved water for another 436. And if those are the conversations we're having with everyone, there may not be the political will at this table is one thing.
Yes.
But the community political will.
And that's all gonna come together.
Exactly.
Yep, and not only that, but both teams, consultant, comprehensive plan and housing, are both having joint meetings with our water district guys, especially Ryan and Chris over there. So that they really have a grasp on what we have and what we can handle. And what happens if there's a wildfire as we get into resiliency around our water treatment plant. How does that affect all of this? So it's a huge picture coming together.
Yep.
And yeah, I admit it's hard for probably from your perspective, you're not seeing a lot of that, so. Right now, you'll see it in the end, as it keeps going, you won't even see it at the end, you'll see it, but not quite yet.
I agree that the timing is actually really well, both these to work together. So thank you.
So one of the things, yeah, one of the things we recommend is your measurable objectives. So you have that zoning change, right? That's illustrated in the future. You can check in on that. How did that work? Are you seeing more units or more density coming to fruition from that change? If you're seeing 0 units coming to fruition from that change, we got to do something different, right? That's checking in on your program. So that's something to understand is you're always checking back in. How's that working? It's not working. It's not penciling out. So that's important to understand.
That's consideration.
Susan, did you have any quick follow-up wrap up for the group?
Yes, I do. So I have some other questions, but what the look ahead here is we're going to explore those planning scenarios, right? The range of strategies. We got our marching orders from a lot of different directions, from town staff and the stakeholders from this joint session. I really like listening, and now it's our time to explore these strategies. And then we'll continue to explore those strategies on June 12th with the stakeholder working group. And then we'll do a deep dive into the existing housing strategies, programs, and resources after that. So we'll do that modeling piece. We're going to do a deeper dive into these strategies, making sure that they'll pencil out for you guys, highest and best use for those properties. And so that's important to understand. And then also, if you have any other questions or any follow-up, please, I didn't put Katie's or James's email up here, but you should have that, right? But here's my email, ethan@dynamicplanning.co. And please, if you want to answer those questions on the slides that I had individually, please, by all means, send the answers to those questions or your thoughts. I don't know if that's based upon the first presentation, maybe you should send them to Katie, like as elected officials, right?
Keep the smart.
If I could, since we got planning commission and, like, all you got a chance to do was hear going on, like we barely talked about ideas or anything, right? And so I think now it's like on you to do some homework to what else, what are we missing? What did you not hear? What were your questions? And I guess that goes for us too. I'm just part of this process, so I'm really up on what's going on, what they're doing and all. And so, what do you guys feel like we're missing? And I guess that doesn't be answered right at this moment, but let's make sure, we hear it, right? We want you guys to walk away and be like, yeah, they'll never listen to what we say, because that's why we're all here.
And if the planning commission is amenable to it, we were not going to have a meeting. Oh, it's too late right now. We'll get it on a upcoming meeting.
There you go. So I think you should email James at townoffrisco.com to make sure that you're not so you don't bypass the chain of command, right?
And just remember, I mean, we're in May right now. This goes all the way to September, October, so there is still a lot of work still to do. But like we said, if you have thoughts, share them with us. We'll share them with the consultant team. Happy to do that. We have another meeting on June 12th with our stakeholder group. They'll look more into the actionable items, and we'll kind of see what comes from that. So since we're out of time, thank you for your time. We appreciate you, Ethan and Jeff, for helping us out. And like I said, if you have questions.
And I appreciate it. It's very clear everybody cares about this issue.
Deeply.
Thanks for coming in tonight. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys signing off. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Putting everybody out.
Yeah, don't leave the meeting.
I think. Let's go.
Absolutely.
Super. First of all, I would say that I encourage that last discussion to go on as long as you would like, because Tammy stole a bit of my thunder, which is fine. Tammy, and I feel like Tammy has been a kindred spirit more than most for me. In addition to being one of the authors of the Frisco Charter, before my 15 years as city attorney for Edgewater, she was a designated city attorney. I was actually hoping for one of her different presentations. This was a very kind and gentler version of Tammy's orientation of new elected officials. She has one that I think she titles as something like liability issues for public officials in Colorado. It's quite scary about the trouble that you know, focuses on the trouble you can get yourself in by not acting as a fiduciary and conflicts of interest and gives you fears. So he went with a nicer one, which really covered a lot of the stuff that I do. I just wanted, today I was going to talk about quasi-judicial decisions and the Colorado Open Records Act as two distinct topics. I will still do that. We really went through the quasi-judicial decision making in some detail with some questions and answers. So what I wanted to focus on there, we talked about, she set it up in ways that I can act when I'm in a legislative capacity and ways that I can act when I'm in a quasi-judicial capacity, noting that they were diametrically opposed, right? Almost 180. You absolutely can do this, you absolutely can't do that. And we talked a little bit, or I interjected a little bit, I guess, about why that is. Asking you to recall middle school government class and separation of powers and the like. I want to get down in the weeds a little bit on what happens when a quasi-judicial decision gets challenged, right? Legally speaking, in a lawsuit based on a decision that the council has made that was quasi-judicial as opposed to legislative. And the principal difference is the standard of review that those decisions will be decided under. So when you're acting in a legislative capacity, making laws, general applicability, right? You've heard somebody say, well, that's a violation of equal protection. What that, and there is, right? There's an equal protection clause in the US Constitution, and what it means, what they're really saying when they say that, usually are upset because they don't like the way the law applies to them. But from a technical standpoint, law violates equal protection of laws when it doesn't have a rational basis. I mean, think about how broad a standard that is. All you got to come up with is a rational basis. If your law is not irrational, that is to say, you know, what it is you're trying to get at as the public good doesn't have anything to do with what you're prohibiting or what you're requiring. I mean, unless there's just no rationality to it, it's going to be upheld unless it's unlawfully discriminatory for gender, race, religion, that sort of thing, right? It is a very low standard that is applied to legislative decision making. Do you have a rational basis? You don't have to express what that rational basis was. That's up to lawyers to argue later. Oh yeah, they had a rational basis that any legislature could logically think that applying that creating this rule and applying it to this situation would cause this public good to happen. That's it. That's a really low bar. You know, contrast that with a judicial determination as to whether the council properly made a quasi-judicial decision. That gets challenged under Rule 106A4, the Colorado Rules of Civil Procedure. And the standard expressed under that rule is that the decision cannot be arbitrary or capricious. But again, all by itself, that doesn't tell you a whole heck of a lot. But the cases that Colorado courts over the years have fleshed out, what does it mean for a quasi-judicial decision to be improperly arbitrary or capricious? One is obvious, right? It was beyond the authority of the body that made the decision to make this decision, or you've been led badly astray by staff, right? You're being asked to make something you don't even have authority to do. You never see those. What you see is a claim that it was arbitrary and capricious because the decision of the body was not supported by what the courts refer to as competent evidence on the record. It's a standard of proof, right? We all know what a preponderance of the evidence means, right? It's beyond 50%. 50.0001 is a preponderance of the evidence. And we all have a sense, I think, of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Right? If we know that preponderance of the evidence is at 50.1% more likely to be than not, we also have this sense that proof beyond a reasonable doubt is way up here. Way up here. Competent evidence on the record is way down here. It is not, you don't have to have a preponderance of the evidence. You don't have to decide that the evidence, when considered as a whole, weighs more heavily in favor of one side than the other. What you have to have is enough evidence in support of your decision. This is the way the courts have described it. Enough evidence in support of your decision to make the issue at hand, the question to be decided, is it fairly debatable between reasonable people. You have reasons to believe it. So when something can be fairly debatable, right, you can take the word of 10 convicts over 100 nuns. It's right. It's not down to credibility issues. It's down to, is there some evidence on this record from which rational, reasonable people could conclude that this standard has been met? It's a low bar, but it's a bar, right? So what the courts expect when they examine these decisions, okay, so Rule 106 claim gets filed. The very first thing that's going to happen, without any question or argument about it, is we are going to get a court order that said, you shall certify the record of this proceeding to this court. On or before, they'll give us 30 or 45 days. The record of the proceeding means a verbatim transcript, every piece of paper that got put before the legislative body, and a copy of any relevant law that this decision was being made of. And that's it. Not a thing more, not a thing less. Everything that happened during the hearing, nothing that didn't happen during the hearing. And then you proceed, when you're counsel for the town, or you do it on the other side, then you proceed to walk the court through every single criteria for decision that you have, right? Because you will have them in a quasi-judicial, right? There'll be, what did she say, bullet points or prongs. There will be prongs A, B, C, and D, for instance. And you'll have to decide that all of them are met, or one of them are met, or whatever the case may be. So the exercise of the attorney in this instance will be showing exactly what that law is, and then going point by point through the record and through the transcript saying, see, Your Honor, here, there was some testimony on page 7, line 3 through 10 by so-and-so that was evidence in support of this. And you go through the whole thing, and at the end of the day, you argue who clearly was competent evidence, and they're busy doing just the opposite, saying there's none of it here anywhere, Your Honor. They respond to your arguments about what was evidence, and they will either claim that the contrary evidence was so strong that it shouldn't be believed, or whatever the case may be. But you get the idea that what the court is going to examine your decision as if it was an appellate court. You viewing the decision of a lower court, right? Appellate courts, verbatim transcript, every piece of evidence, every bit of law. So they're going to treat you as if they are a court of appeals and you're a lower court, a lower tribunal, and they're going to examine your decision that way. So that's the principal difference. We talked about requirements for an unbiased decision maker, and we talked about rehabilitating people when that happens, and we talked at fair length about ex parte communications. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions on the quasi-judicial decision making before I try to get the high points of the Open Records Act presentation. I don't have a PowerPoint, but in your packet there are 2 memos. This first one I will point to very quickly, and a much more lengthy memo on the Colorado Open Records Act. I guess what I was talking about the Open Records Act, I would add on to what Tammy said about you could find yourself with an attorney, digging through your email account. No, you could find yourself with a court order to march your laptop down to the court and hand it over so that a forensic IT individual can pour through it. Won't be me, particularly in the context of civil litigation, because in civil litigation, discovery, you have a right to discover not only what you believe to be relevant evidence, you get a right to discover any evidence, documents, and the like that you believe reasonably capable of leading you to relevant evidence. In other words, it's a huge fishing expedition at the civil level. So So not only could your emails be subject, you could be without your laptop for a while. So my suggestion here is even more strongly. Public business and discussion, use and only use your address, because it could be quite painful. And it actually happened here in Summit County. It's been 15 years ago now, and I don't even remember the fact of the case, but there are a number of public officials who had to march their staff. The other thing that I would tell you, just in terms of your big picture conception of what is the Open Records Act about, it is not just about handing over records. The Open Records Act itself is about that thick of statutes. I don't know how many pages. There's got to be 100 pages in there. And it's really 3 parts. The part that says, shall hand over these records upon request, and here's how you go about doing it. The part that says you shall not hand over these records and how to go about doing it. And the third part that says you may or may not be disclosing these records depending on your determinations as to the public policy involved. Right, so there's the must disclose, shall never disclose, and if you might imagine that personal confidential information, the town of Frisco comes into lots of information on lots of people that is not public. We do not hand it over. There are also public policy ideas being addressed in there that really don't have much to do other than to prevent things. Like, for instance, the day was municipalities would get requests for, please give me the name and address of any person who has signed up for and received a card to access your recreational facilities. Or please give me an address, anybody who's a water customer. But I mean, these are all public records, but they're not that private. Yeah, you got a water account with a town, who cares? You don't really have a privacy interest in that. But nonetheless, those are records that are prohibited from being handed over because commercial entities would go on fishing expeditions looking for mailing lists. Oh, well, we want folks into recreation, so we'll go to that list and then we'll send them ads from FBI or whatever the case may be. So it's not just privacy issues, it's also use of public information that is thought to be unwanted, unnecessary, not needed, right, by information gatherers, things like that.
Anything for profit. Could it be separated that? I guess
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They protect it the same way. Basically, the statute just says you shall not hand over any identifying information. And so the people who you as utilities, recreational services, they pretty much. Let's see. It won't surprise you. You know, among mandatory non-disclosure sociological, scholastic achievement data. Personnel files, though that's a tricky one that's like Tammy suggested is kind of counterintuitive. The personnel file, for instance, we're trying to receive an open records request for a personnel file of a given employee. Most of the documents in that file are actually to be disclosed. What you don't disclose is their personal information, where they live, you know, what their phone number is, their social security number is and the like. But you do have to disclose performance evaluations. With certain exceptions, there are portions you can redact out. You have to disclose an employment agreement, for instance, you know, things that you feel might in first blush be private aren't under that personnel file exception. Here's the statutory language. The name that prohibited: names, addresses, telephone numbers, and personal financial information of past or present users of public utilities, public facilities, or recreational or cultural services that are owned or operated by the state, its agencies, institutions, or places. So big, broad. Don't go fishing for your shopping list in our pond. Thank you. Generally covered. Well, if you'd like a breakdown, the last several pages of the memo concern one of the seminal cases that determined what was a public record and what wasn't a public record. Because remember, all of this is the availability of public records, which are defined as records maintained or kept by a public entity that are quote for use in the exercise or functions required or authorized by law and administrative rule or involving receipt or expenditure of public funds. There's a fascinating case that arose in the context of a sexual relationship between the county clerk for the county of Arapahoe and his administrative assistant. And it involved the local newspapers and press trying to get their hands on those well over 500 personal, intimate emails between these two. And the lower court had initially said, well, you know, these were all done on a public computer. The employer, well, how is it that these are not made, maintained, or kept by the public entity? And at the end of the day, the Supreme Court ended up holding that that's really not determined. It's the subject matter. Was this discussion about public business? And it clearly was not about public business. And one of the best lines in the best paragraph that I've ever had or I've ever read in a Colorado Supreme Court case. After considering the content of the email messages as required by the statute, conclude that not all of the email messages issued here have a demonstrable connection to the performance of public functions or involve the receipt or expenditure of public funds. It is apparent that a large portion of the email messages instead contain only sexually explicit exchanges between Baker and Sale. Based upon the content of the emails, it is clear they were sent in furtherance of their personal relationship and were not for use in the performance of the public functions of the clerk's office. These messages demonstrate the very private exchanges that convey quote every thought and feeling unquote of a public official that we sought to guard from disclosure in WIC of the case. That's one. The only discernible purpose of disclosing the content of these messages is to shed light on the extent of Baker's and Sales's fluency with sexually explicit terminology and to satisfy the prurient interests of the press and the public.
How long ago was that?
Sorry.
What year was that?
Oh, that case, oh my goodness. 2000 and. What was that case? I'm sorry, I'm not sure I pointed it.
That's okay. I'm just always amazed that people still think that they can.
I don't believe they did. I want to say this was in the aughts. 2003, it was within, I mean, this wasn't back in the tour day.
In email.
So, as always, if you have any questions. You know. Yeah. Nice, thank you. Tammy, I just completely text message on there discoverable too. Absolutely. You know, if you can do it in smoke signals when somebody reports it, that'd be.
We have video.
And we have video, and then you'd have to understand what the heck.
So just before we break, we handed out a list of different side organizations that we participate in as a town. Quite by and large, staff covers the regular participation in these, but there are some that council members cover down now. Especially some of the internal committees around grants and scholarships and things like that. This is on your next work session item agenda to discuss, but we just wanted you to have it ahead of time so that you can take a look at it. And the other item is because of the nature of our executive session and the rest of our meeting today, we're going to eat dinner. We're gonna go over to that side of the room for public comment and consent agenda, and then we're not gonna break this down. We're gonna come back here for the executive session. So it's dinner time. You just.
Thank you.
Question form and executive session, he can figure. Exactly what. Yeah. That. Oh, no, he said he'd bring it. He will.
Yeah.
They do.
Thanks, you guys. So it's 7:04. Let's get ready to start the regular meeting, the Frisco Town Council for May 14th. How about a roll call?
All right. Allen,
Here.
Blanco, here, Inkin,
Here.
Skipjack Adrian, here, Held,
Here.
Kibbe,
Here.
and Aronson is absent tonight.
And with roll call complete, I'll open the floor for public comment. Anyone wanting to make public comments not on tonight's agenda, please step up to the podium or raise your hand if you're online, and you'll have 3 minutes. Please give us your name and address as you start.
My name's Stacey Titus. I live in Denver, but I also have a house up here at 606 Little Chief Way. So that's our second home. We also own 3 rental properties up here, 121 Galena, 306 Creekside, Unit C, and the subject of my comment tonight, 214 East Main Street, which is the 6-unit apartment building. We bought that in June of 2021, and it was not in good shape. And so we, after letting our tenants stay for a year and us figuring what we were gonna do, we gutted it down to the bones. Everything is new in there. And we are just finishing up and waiting to get the very final finishing touches done. And we learned recently from the town that due to new enforcement of parking restrictions, that we no longer have parking. We have 6 units in there, and they're 2-bedroom units. And we support locals, they're long-term rentals. All of our rentals are long-term rentals. And we intend to keep them that way, but we have nowhere for our locals to park. So they have been parking behind our building in the past for years, as far as I understand it, for 40 years. And it's been theorized that they were parking in front of the building before the sidewalk was put in the 60s. Obviously I can't comment on that, but all I know now is that there's nowhere for people who are hardworking locals to park. And then said, oh, well, they can park on 2nd or 3rd if there's parking available. And if there's not, then they can park down by the highway. Or, I mean, like, who at midnight, groceries after a long shift wants to hike in the snow, a mile away? It's just not fair to ask our tenants to do that, and it's not fair to us. So what I'm asking for you all to do is I respectfully request that you direct the town staff to explore a limited license for our tenants to park on the Sabatini lot. From what I understand, this wouldn't really impact anybody, and it's not being used currently. And I believe that would solve the town's concerns. So I'm hoping that that would be a solution for everybody. I don't know if you have any questions for me.
Great, thank you for your comments. And you, just so you're clear, we are not in a position to respond to public comment, but thank you. Yeah.
What was your name?
My name is Stacey Titus.
Okay, thanks.
We own it, the LLC that owns 214 East Main, 214 East Main LLC. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other public comment? Any online? Nothing online? With that, I'll close public comment and open it up to mayor and council comments. I just wanted to follow, and I'll give credit where credit is due. I'll follow the Board of County Commissioners who today had a proclamation for EMS week, which is next week, the 19th through the rest of that week. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's just acknowledging folks that work in the community and render care and transport the folks outside of the hospitals. Any other comments? No other mayor and council comments. I'll close mayor and council comments.
We look to, Tom for staff updates.
Sure, just a short one. Town Cleanup Day is coming. And it is. Vanessa's gonna kill me if I get this wrong. It's June 1st. Starts at 9 a.m. Check-in on Main Street, and then proceeds from there. We welcome the council to participate in that as you choose to. And the check-in will be at the historic park. And then, to not be confused with the 2024 chipping program, because we're starting to see the piles of brush show up on the street from people cleaning up their yards, which we really appreciate that they do. The pickup for that, or the chipping, will happen between June 3rd and June 7th. That's when the chipper will be running through town in Frisco. So if you have constituents that are asking about it, just please pass on that information, or they can come to the town website and that information is there as well.
This is the chipping program is the Summit County Wildfire Council funds it and operates it. And the idea is that homeowners can mitigate around their own houses and protect your house.
And I guess the only other thing is that I hadn't heard about it, but perhaps you all have. Our legislators, our local legislators are holding a town hall tomorrow night between 5 and 6 at the senior center. Just a recap of the legislative session. So if you want to attend, please do.
Sorry, 5 and 6 where?
Senior center.
Thank you.
Would we need to notice?
Perfect. Just go talk to each other.
Yep.
I mean, sit by it.
No. Okay, that's it for staff updates.
That's it.
Great. And now I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion has been made and seconded. Please call the question.
Alan.
Yes.
Kalenko. Yes. Inkin.
Yes.
Scripcheck Adrian.
Yes.
Held.
Yes.
And Kibbe.
Yes.
And Aronson is absent.
Great. We need to adjourn and then just go straight in. Okay.
Move in.
Move in.
Yeah, I need a motion and a second to move in.
Gotcha. So with that, our next order of business tonight is an executive session, and with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to enter an executive session pursuant to section 24-6-402 parentheses B parentheses. Parentheses 4 parentheses B CRS concerning the potential sale or other transfer of an interest in certain real property owned by the town and known as 602 Galena Street, and pursuant to section 24-6-402 parentheses 4 parentheses E CRS to determine positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiation, to develop strategy for negotiations, and to instruct negotiators concerning a development agreement for the development of an affordable housing project at 602 Galena Street.
Rob and Andy.
Quick around here.
So a motion's been made and seconded. Please call the question.
Kibbe.
Yes.
Alan.
Yes.
Kalenko.
Yes.
Inkin.
Yes.
Aronson. Absent. Scripcheck Adrian.
Yes.
Held.
Yes.
All right. Move it across the room, people.
Move it, move it, move it.